Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Joining us today will be recruiting writer EJ Holland from the Wolverine Magazine with the latest news on the class of 2023. The spring sports scene is winding down, and other than football recruiting news, things should be quiet until we get into July. That's when the preseason magazines hit the stands and Big Ten Media Days takes place. After that, the anticipation will build daily as we anxiously await the start of another season. Summer is also the most important period for Jim Harbaugh and his staff. There will be some huge recruiting visit weekends in June, and of course, barbecue in the Big House will be back. My guest today says the class of 2023 got off to a slower than expected start, and we all know why. Staff changes and Jim Harbaugh flirting with the NFL had a negative impact on this class. We can still make up for lost time, though. Under Jim, summer is when Michigan has done their best work on the recruiting trail. Joining us next with his thoughts is recruiting writer EJ Holland from the Wolverine Magazine. So stay with us. Here with us on our game day segment this week, as we, of course, talk recruiting, is EJ Holland from the Wolverine Magazine. It's been a while, EJ, but great to have you back with us.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Well, as we all know, these summer weeks and months are just really important in the recruiting process for the class of 2023. Last week, there was a lot of buzz on Friday. Five-star quarterback recruit Dante Moore from Detroit King was visiting Ann Arbor. I mean, he's been there before, but it is becoming very, very important to get this guy to commit, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you can easily make the argument that Dante Moore is the most important recruit of the cycle. I think the only other prospect that compares is fellow five-star athlete Nicholas Harbor. But, I mean, Dante plays the most important position in football. He's right in Michigan's own backyard. The Wolverines have been recruiting him since he was a seventh grader. I mean, he's a supreme talent. He's the number one guy on the board for a reason. I mean, Michigan hasn't even offered any other quarterbacks this cycle other than Arch Manning, but obviously Arch is a long shot. I think Dante's been kind of that staple for this Michigan staff for not just this recruiting cycle, but for years. Like I said, they offered him as a middle schooler. Jim Harbaugh has personally built a relationship there. I mean, I think Dante is that true prize in this recruiting class.
A lot of writers, it seems, think that Notre Dame is the leader right now for Dante's services, probably because Marcus Freeman is doing really an outstanding job recruiting this cycle. Michigan and Notre Dame compete for many of the same players year in and year out, EJ, but it seems like in this cycle, we're going head-to-head with them on a lot of guys.
Yeah, definitely. I think Notre Dame's done a good job with Dante. I think they built some momentum here in the offseason. They hosted him on a visit, and many thought he was going to commit during his time in South Bend. Obviously, that did not happen. I think Dante is a very calculated kid in the sense that he has an entire checklist, and he wants a school to check all those boxes. And I think Notre Dame has checked a lot of boxes for him, but they haven't checked every box for him. And that's left the opportunity open for other schools. LSU has made a run. He has a pre-existing relationship with Brian Kelly, who is obviously the head coach at Notre Dame. Miami is a school that he's visited and has a relationship with former Michigan offensive coordinator Josh Gaddis. Oregon made a big impression on him on his official visit out there. He's scheduled to visit Texas A&M next month. So there's a lot of contenders that are out of region as well. I would say that Notre Dame's the biggest contender in region in regards to who Michigan is facing off against. But at the end of the day, Michigan's been a constant in this recruitment. Like I said, they offered him as a middle schooler. He has visited on several occasions back to back to back this off season. So he hasn't stopped visiting. And just as a normal kid, he's been on campus more than 100 times. So when he was younger, he used to do an academic program up at Michigan, and he would stay there for weeks at a time. So he's very, very familiar with the program. He's very familiar with the school. Dante's also a 4.0 GPA kid, so he values the education. Like I said, he would go to academic camp at Michigan. So there's a lot that Dante likes about Michigan as well. I think Michigan, much like Notre Dame, has checked a lot of his boxes, but not every box. It's almost like it's become the school that's a little bit more of a boring option because it's been around for so long. And I think he's continued to visit all these other schools. But much like a guy like Donovan Edwards, I think that at the end of the day, Dante could circle back and say, hey, Michigan is home. It checks more boxes than all these other schools. If you remember, Donovan Edwards took his recruitment all the way up until the early signing period, made his decision on basically the last day possible. He flirted with Ohio State. He flirted with Georgia, and he picked Michigan. And I think Dante could see a similar path. He's wanting to wait. So just because he's a quarterback, that position naturally commits earlier on in the recruiting cycles. Dante's not going to do that. He wants to wait until late summer. I just talked to him yesterday. He told me he could take his decision into the fall. We even joked about him potentially pulling off with Donovan Edwards and just announcing on signing day. And I mentioned Donovan, and it's interesting that Michigan had Donovan Edwards on campus on Friday to spend time with Dante Moore. They went axe throwing. Donovan kind of gave him a rundown of his recruitment, gave him a little bit of advice, gave him some insights into Michigan. And that's the perfect guy for Dante to talk to. There's been some negative in-state perception over the last couple of cycles. But at the end of the day, I think Michigan's landed the most talented guy in the state of Michigan in back-to-back classes in Donovan Edwards and Will Johnson. And I think their opinions outweigh anybody else's. I think Moore really values them as peers. He looks up to Donovan. He played 7-on-7 with Will Johnson and was part of the Sound Mind, Sound Body program with him. And both are very, very involved in his recruitment. Like I said, Donovan spent the day with him on Friday. Will has talked to Dante about joining him up in Ann Arbor, and they have seen each other a couple of times this off season. So look, I mean, he is comfortable at Michigan, maybe a little bit too comfortable, which is why he's expanded his options. Notre Dame has made him the number one guy as well. They've talked to him about coming in and playing as a true freshman. Depth chart has been used against Michigan because, Cade still has some eligibility. JJ has the eligibility. Obviously, Dante, growing up in the Midwest, is very familiar with JJ and him being labeled as the guy that's going to get Michigan over the hump. And I think that's kind of, put a little bit of a roadblock up for the Wolverines in landing Dante. But overall, I feel like there's no reason that Michigan can't close with Dante. The longer this recruitment goes, I think the better for Michigan and the worse for Notre Dame. And I think Dante just also feels a little more comfortable with the environment in Ann Arbor as opposed to South Bend. But on the flip side of the coin, I think he might have a better relationship, with Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, than Matt Weiss, the offensive coordinator at Michigan. But I know that Matt Weiss has been putting in work to continue to build that relationship with Dante. This visit did not feature Jim Harbaugh, who is out on his humanitarian efforts. This visit was mostly about getting Dante more comfortable with Weiss, which is going to be big in that recruitment. But overall, I think it's going to come down to Dante realizing, if Michigan checks those final boxes, and for Jim Harbaugh to close the deal. I think ultimately Jim is the X factor. As quirky as he can be, he's the guy that can personally relate to Dante. He's the guy that played quarterback in the NFL. He's the guy that's coached, some great players at the position. And I think he has that connection with Dante. He's the one that personally offered him as a seventh grader. So overall, I think it's going to come down to Harbaugh closing and making him feel comfortable with where he stands at Michigan. I know Dante was a little concerned with Harbaugh's flirtations with the NFL this offseason. I also think that's been a negative against Michigan. But I think Harbaugh's always at his best in the summer when he gets guys back on visits and takes them to his house and does, the whole 9 yards. I think Dante is going to be back on campus here soon. Like I said, he's visited multiple times this offseason. I think he'll make several visits throughout the summer. He only lives 30 minutes away. But yeah, I feel like, yes, Notre Dame did build some momentum early on, but they weren't able to close. So, as long as this keeps going, I think Michigan's always going to be a factor and may pull out a similar result like they did with Donovan Edwards.
Well, we will certainly keep an eye on this. It's going to be a nail biter right into the fall, it sounds like. As far as other recruits over the weekend, any names of note in town with Dante?
There were a couple underclassmen. Davi Belfort, a 2025 quarterback, ended up picking up an offer from Michigan. This is a kid that I actually saw at a 7-on-7 tournament in Jacksonville last year, and he really impressed me. I tweeted about him, and he's on the rise as one of the best signal callers in 2025. We're so focused on Dante right now as a 2023, 2025 seems so far away, but it'll be here before you know it. But, the interesting thing with having Belfort on campus is just that Michigan's making plans for those future classes. With Dante, he's the guy in 2023. It's obviously not the same in 2024 and even 2025. Michigan has several offers out in 2024, including CJ Carr, who's obviously a legacy, Michael Van Buren, who's an on-300 prospect out of Baltimore St. Francis, which has been very, very kind to Michigan on the recruiting trail. Julian Sayin, the top 100 quarterback recruit from California who recently visited. So several options in 2024, several options in 2025 with Belfort visiting, Michigan going after Ryan Montgomery, who's a highly touted prospect in Ohio, Stone Saunders, who's a top prospect out in Pennsylvania, who Matt Weiss has a personal connection to. So several quarterbacks, on the radar, and arguably, or what could be the biggest talent in the state of Michigan, Bryce Underwood, who's the quarterback at Belleville, won a state championship as a true freshman, may end up being better than CJ Carr and Dante Moore. So a lot of talent in the future at the quarterback position. But as it stands right now, Dante's the guy in 2023. But I think Michigan fans should be excited about the talent Michigan is recruiting in the next couple of cycles under center.
Well, EJ, let's take a look, sort of a refresher for our listeners at some of the verbal commits that we have so far in this cycle and get your thoughts on them. And let's start with Raylen Wilson. We hear an awful lot about this kid, 4-star linebacker from Tallahassee, Florida. And I guess, the question I always get from listeners is, can we hold on to him?
Yeah, that's the thing with Raylen Wilson. He's a tremendous talent. I had a chance to see him earlier this offseason, actually in January. I flew out to Orlando for a 7-on-7 tournament, and it was cool to see him in that type of setting because 7-on-7 is not really a setting where linebackers excel. A lot of linebackers play 7-on-7 and they try to sharpen up their skills, as we all know. Being able to play in space and cover ground sideline to sideline will make you a lot of money. And Raylen Wilson in that setting was as impressive as anyone there. The state of Florida has crazy football talent. Everybody knows it's a hotbed. And in a tournament that was filled with so many high-level skill position players, Raylen Wilson as a linebacker was a huge standout, and if not the best performer there, definitely one of the top three. This is a kid who is a little undersized from a height standpoint, at about 6 foot, 6'1". I don't really care about height as an inside linebacker. This guy can cover a ton of ground. Like I said, if you can play in space, you can make a lot of money. Raylen's a perfect fit for the Michigan defense, which really requires its linebackers to get sideline to sideline, to play with a lot of speed and space, to be able to cover multiple positions. Raylen Wilson can do all of that. And on top of that, while he's not, while he's only 6 foot, pushing 6'1", he's really thick. He's filling out. I think he's already pushing up to 220. Just a really strong build in both his upper and lower halves. And when you look at it, I saw him in 7-on-7, but when you turn on the film, I mean, he's a guy that loves to smack people. He's extremely physical. He's a headhunter. I love Raylen Wilson. I think he's the best guy in the class. I don't think it's very close at all. But at the same time, he is an SEC level player. He's an SEC type of linebacker. That's why Georgia's continuing to recruit him. That's why Florida's continuing to recruit him. Both schools hosted him for unofficial visits this offseason. Both schools expected or already scheduled to get official visits this summer. It's going to be tough to keep him. I mean, when the national champs are making you a top priority, that's tough to pass up. Florida obviously being the home state school, Gainesville being pretty close to Tallahassee. That's a factor. The new staff there has been making him a top priority. Both schools are doing really well in terms of NIL. I think it's going to be really, really tough to hold on to Raylen Wilson. At the same time, George Hilo, Michigan's linebackers coach, has strong connections throughout North Florida. He's a big reason that Michigan won over Wilson in the first place. Jim Harbaugh has been involved in that recruitment. New defensive coordinator Jesse Minter just joined Hilo on a trip to Tallahassee to see Wilson last week. So can Michigan keep Wilson? Yes. Will they keep Wilson? I don't know if we can answer that right now. I think it's more likely he leaves the class and stays in the class. But you never know. Again, Michigan's always at its best in the summer. He's scheduled to make it in for Victor's weekend on June 17th, and that visit will obviously be huge in determining what happens in that particular recruitment.
Well, another kid we have a verbal from is 3-star defensive lineman from Loyola Academy in Wilmette, Illinois. Brooks Barr, what do you like about this kid?
Yeah, I really like Brooks Barr, and I feel like a lot of people are really undervaluing Brooks. He's not very highly touted across the recruiting networks, but not a lot of people have seen Brooks. It's a little, me living here in Chicago, it's a little disappointing, how little exposure kids in the Windy City get. Not a lot of the national guys come out here, which is disappointing. But there's a lot of talent here in Chicago, in Chicagoland. And Brooks Barr, I think it could end up being one of the steals of the class. So he's a legit 6'6", and he's already up at 275 pounds. His potential is through the roof. I mean, this is a kid that's added 35 pounds in just the last year. So he's getting really comfortable with his body. Right now, he's still a little slow-footed, still needs to work on his get-off, but he has really good length for a 3 technique. He's a strong kid. He's disciplined. He's very hard worker. He has great technique. He gets to learn from one of the best coaches in Chicagoland, John Holishak, who played for the Buffalo Bills. So I think there's a lot to like about Brooks Barr. And if there's one thing that Mike Elston, Michigan's new defensive line coach, is known for, is being able to evaluate. He evaluated Barr at Notre Dame. He offered him almost as soon as he got to Michigan. I have liked a lot of Elston's evaluations since he arrived in Ann Arbor, which is, no surprise given his track record. And I think he did a great job here with Barr, and I trust in Elston, and, I trust my eyes from going out and having seen Barr twice already. And I really like this take. I think he's a kid that's going to outplay his ranking.
Well, one of the commits that fascinates me is a local kid from Dexter, Cole Cabana. He is a 4-star running back, and from what everyone says, the guy can just flat out fly.
Yeah, that's the thing with Cole. I mean, he runs 10.5, 100 meter, I think is his PR. He's a guy that can absolutely fly. Anytime you have that type of speed, you can use it on the football field. I don't think Cole. I have a really tough time rating Cole, because I don't think Cole is an every down back. I don't think he's a guy that's going to get, maybe first and second down carries. He could, in certain times, but I think he's more of that third down back, or I think he's a guy you put in the slot, or a guy you use in the return game. He has a little bit of a slender build. My fear is that he becomes more of a Sam McGuffey type. But I do think anytime you have that speed, you can utilize it. And I think Jim Harbaugh and Matt Weiss and Sharon Moore can utilize that type of speed. What I want to see from Cabana this season is just, first of all, Dexter doesn't play in a very strong league with strong competition, but I just want to see more from Cabana as far as what can you do other than just run fast. I know he can catch, I know he can run fast, but I'd like to see how elusive he is in the open field. I'd like to see how tough he can run between the tackles. I'd like to see more of his vision. I'd like to see how well he does with cutback lanes. There's a lot I just want to see from Cabana as a pure running back. Right now, I think he's a fast athlete playing football that, again, you can do a lot with. And this isn't me underrating Cabana. I think he can be very effective if you use him the right way. But I am not sure he's a full-time running back. I think a lot of questions with Cabana will be answered here as a senior.
Well, another in-state kid that we have a verbal from is Samir Morgan. He's a 3-star wideout from West Bloomfield. What can you tell us about him, EJ?
Yeah, Samaj is a prospect I'm very, very familiar with. I've seen Samaj more than any of the commits in the class. I feel like I've seen him live like upwards of 15 times. So I really like Samaj. I think he's an explosive slot receiver. He is kind of built a little bit like a running back. He has a really thick lower half. He's a strong kid. He is short. He's right at about 5'9", but he's solid. I think he can take the hits. I think he has that explosion. He looks fast on the football field. He can take the top off of defense. I watched him last year against Rochester Adams, and I mean, he went vertical a couple times, including late in the game, to almost help West Bloomfield rally in that game. But he's a guy that can stretch the field. He's a guy that can kill you over the middle. Again, he's very elusive and explosive in the open field. But the thing with Samaj is he looks fast on the football field, but his track times don't match up. So it's really hard to gauge just how fast he is. And track times are very nice when, rating kids. Obviously, 100 meters has been a big thing in determining first-round draft pick potential or just draft pick potential overall. But I think watching Samaj, it's clear he's very football fast. But the biggest thing that stands out about Samaj is just he has that dog mentality. He's a guy that's extremely tough. He's gritty. He bleeds maize and blue. I talked to Curtis Blackwell, his 7-on-7 coach and one of the most prominent recruiting figures in the Detroit metro area. And he told me he's the type of kid that wins you rivalry games. And I think that's a big thing with Samaj is he's a kid that others gravitate towards, and he's a kid that's going to do everything you want for the program. He's a West Bloomfield kid. He played for Ron Bellamy. Bellamy obviously coaching wide receivers now. I think is going to get the most out of him. And the good thing about Samaj this offseason, I think he's taken the next step in a lot of areas of his game. He's become more of a natural pass catcher. He's become more of an explosive route runner. Everything Samaj does is very angry. His route running is angry. He attacks the ball when catching it. So I like Samaj. He's a great competitor. Again, he has that dog mentality that's often overused, a phrase that I don't really like to use, but I think if you're going to describe anybody as a dog, it's definitely Samaj Morgan.
Well, joining Cole Cabana as a running back commit is Ben Hall from Kennesaw, Georgia. He's a 3-star running back. Tell us about him.
Yeah, I got my first look at Ben Hall this spring. I really like this kid just from a personal standpoint. He's a really smart kid. He's part of the leadership council at his high school. He does everything the right way. High GPA kid. I believe he carries about a 3.9. So again, smart leader, fits that Michigan mold. As far as him as a player, he's right at about 5'10". He's 227 pounds, and when you look at him, he's just built like a truck. I mean, his lower half is incredibly impressive. His thighs are huge. And with his upper half, he's kind of chiseled up, but he can still add even more weight. I mean, this is a guy that could be like a 5'10", 245-pound bowling ball. When I was out in Georgia, a coach at another school actually compared him to Michael Turner, who had a successful NFL career playing for the Atlanta Falcons and San Diego Chargers. And I love that comparison. I think Ben Hall can be exactly that type of player. And Michael Turner's not, maybe as well known as his Chargers counterpart, LaDainian Tomlinson, but he, again, was a very productive player. He had multiple 1,000-yard seasons in the NFL. I think Ben Hall can fill that Hassan Haskins type of power back role. I think with Hall, I still have questions in regards to his speed. I know he can run over people between the tackles, but I'd like to see him improve his vision. I think he's going to get great coaching from Mike Hart. I think Mike Hart sees a little bit of himself in Ben Hall, which is why he took him so early. I know there was a lot of discussion on whether Hall should have been a take this early in the cycle, but obviously Hart sees something special in him, and Hart's done a tremendous job of coaching up backs that are in the same mold as he was. So I think the pieces are in place for Ben Hall to outplay his ranking and be successful. I'm not extremely high on Hall as a recruit. I think I would rate him as a high 3-star, and it was kind of the same opinion I had of CJ Stokes last cycle. But I think both guys are just such great fits at Michigan, great scheme fits, great fits on and off the field, and have Mike Hart as a mentor. I think both Stokes and Hall are more than capable of outplaying my opinion on them, just because everything's kind of there for them to find success.
Well, the next young man I wanted to talk about is our kicker, Adam Samaha. He's from New Boston here and comes out of my old league, the Huron League. And not too many kids make it to not only Michigan, but the Big Ten out of the Huron League. So, the kickers, as we all know, very, very hard to really know how good they are. But have you seen much of him?
Yeah, I had a chance to go out and meet with Adam. First of all, he's a great kid. But secondly, he's a really good athlete. This is a kid, if you look at his basketball mixtape, it is impressive. He can windmill dunk. He can hit a long-range 3. His dad was actually part of the basketball program at Michigan, so he knows a little thing or two about playing some hoops. But as a pure kicker, that's what he is. We saw Tommy Doman, in the previous cycle, the 2021 cycle, and he was more of a combo guy. He was a taller, big leg punter that could also kick. Adam is more of just a pure kicker. He can punt if you need him to, but he's a guy that's going to focus on field goals and extra points and kickoffs. But he has a big leg as well. I just saw a video of him hitting a 55-yarder at a corn blue camp last week. So he's very accurate in all levels. His coach really praised him for just being extremely consistent. And obviously a big thing with being a kicker is just being able to handle pressure. Adam really lives for it. And like I said, he's just a really good kid. He's an underrated athlete. I think he's going to be a great fit as a kicker. I think Doman's going to be a great fit as a punter. And Michigan really, really values special teams. They're going to go after the best of the best in the country. It just so happens that both Doman and Samaha were right in Michigan's backyard. But Jay Harbaugh does, I can't say this enough, Jay Harbaugh does an incredible job coaching special teams and recruiting special teamers. And I think he's going to get a lot out of Samaha.
Well, we just talked about two of the running backs. We have a commit from so far Cole Cabana and Ben Hall. How many do you think we might actually take in this cycle, and who are some of the other names we are in on, EJ?
Yeah, when you have two running backs committed, it's really tough to sell a third, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I'm not sure that I see Michigan adding a third running back. I was about to say defensive back because one guy they are continuing to recruit is Jeremiah Love. He's a top 150 running back out of St. Louis, Missouri. The staff absolutely loves him. He's a speedster. He clocked a verified 4.3 at an Under Armour camp. But recently, Steve Klinkscale has been recruiting him as a defensive back. He's making him a top priority as a corner. But at the same time, Love is a great athlete, and I wouldn't be surprised if Love turns out to be a better running back than both Cabana and Hall. So I think you definitely go after a guy like Love that provides position flexibility that you really like as a corner, but that can also play running back. Some other guys to know that Michigan is still somewhat recruiting. Caleb Jackson out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He's another power back type, about 5'10", 205 pounds. Michigan's still in talks with him here and there. London Montgomery is a more recent offer. He's a consensus 4-star out of Scranton, Pennsylvania. He's a little more of a wiry, pass-catching type of back that can play in the slot. I had a chance to see him at a camp here in Ohio recently. I think he can do some different things within the offense, but that's about it. There are a couple guys that they're monitoring as potential third backs, but I think really Michigan has its power back in Hall, its speedy back in Cabana, and can be selective if they do want to try to go after a third back and continue to recruit elite level athletes like a Jeremiah Love, who can also be a high end corner.
Well, as we know, Michigan would like to, as always, build up that interior offensive line, or at least get as many really top-notch prospects as possible. Right now, we are in on some good ones, like Amir Herring, who's another local kid out of West Bloomfield. You have a 4-star Sam Pendleton out of North Carolina. I think Notre Dame's in on him too, but who else have we offered that we really have made inroads with, EJ?
Well, there are a lot of tackles this cycle that Michigan is in on as far as interior offensive linemen. You mentioned Amir Herring. Herring's an interesting one. First of all, I really like Amir Herring. I think personally as a kid, he's terrific. He's a high GPA kid, another 3.8, 3.9 kid. That aspires to be a medical doctor one day. He loves the Michigan program. I think he would be, much like Samir Morgan, a building block for winning rivalry games and just a big help in the locker room. As a football player, I really like him as well. I mean, he's aggressive. He likes to put people in the dirt. He's technically sound. He's a guy that I think has kind of reached his limit on what he's going to be. I don't think there's much of a ceiling there, which is why some schools aren't as high on him. But I don't think you can find a guy with a much higher floor than Amir Herring. Michigan has been hot and cold on Herring. It'll be interesting to see if they make him a priority again, if they continue to recruit others. But if I were Michigan, I would definitely take Herring. He recently visited. I know he'd love to come back for an official visit. It's just more so Michigan continuing to monitor some other guys, and I think there's a little bit of concern in terms of his ceiling. But other guys to know as interior guys, and going back to Herring very quickly, he's a guy that can play guard and center. Another guy that can play guard and center that Michigan is very high on is Landon Hatchett out of the Pacific Northwest. He's a kid that's visited Michigan on multiple occasions. He's not super highly rated. He's only a high 3-star, but I know Michigan values him a ton. I actually had a chance to see Hatchett when I went to Seattle last year for Michigan's summer satellite camp, and it was actually at that camp where Hatchett got to work with Sharon Moore, who also made the trip to Seattle. And I know that Moore really liked him at that camp. Like I said, Hatchett's rewarded Moore with a couple of visits, is now scheduled to make an official visit next month. So Hatchett's a guy that Michigan is definitely prioritizing in the interior of the offensive line. You mentioned Sam Pendleton. He's off the board. He committed to Notre Dame recently, so no longer really a viable option. Another guy that Michigan really likes is 4-star Roderick Kearney out of Orange Park, Florida, which is in the Jacksonville area. Just a 300-pound mauler, kid that George Hilo has connections to. Again, Hilo very well connected throughout North Florida. Michigan trying to get him on campus for an official visit next month. A guy that I think is a tackle guard tweener, Trevor Locke out of Indianapolis, is a guy that's kind of rising back up the board a little bit. He's a guy that Michigan could get on campus for an official visit this summer. A guy that's a very high priority is Paul Mubenga out of Beaufort, Georgia. Beaufort produces a ton of high-level talent out in the Peach State. He's scheduled to come in for an official visit on June 10th. Another guy that Coach Moore is very high on is Ian Reed out of Austin Vandegrift. Listed as a tackle, but likely to play interior. I think he's a really, really good prospect in the interior of the offensive line. Vandegrift's a really good program down in Central Texas. I think there's some work to do. Some other schools appear to be higher than Michigan at this time, including in-state program Texas. But Michigan trying to get his final official visit and recently made his top schools list. So that's kind of a rundown of the interior of the offensive line.
Okay, well, as far as offensive tackles go, the ones we've heard the most about are guys like Caden Proctor, and he's a 5-star from Des Moines. Caden Green from Lee Summit, Missouri. A 4-star kid, Charles Jagusa, who I've heard a lot about. And you mentioned Trevor Locke from Indy as an inside guy, but Michigan is also interested with him and possibly on the outside too, aren't they?
Yeah, Locke's an interesting kid. I went out and I saw him at Roncalli, and just sizing him up, it looks like he's a guy that's going to move into the interior, but he's definitely more of a flex guy, a guy that could be a right or a guy that could move down to guard. I don't think he's a center type like a Herring or a Hatchet, but I do think he's a guy that could slide inside or play tackle later on in his career. He's definitely he's one of the more interesting prospects on the board right now, especially since he's a guy that was high on Michigan early. They kind of cooled on him and now have kind of shown a little more interest. So he's one of the more interesting guys that I'm following on that board.
We have offers out for some really top-notch defensive line prospects like Jason Moore out of DeMatha, John Walker from Florida, a local kid, Jalen Thompson from Cass Tech, just to mention a few. So how are we doing with those kids, and what other defensive lineman prospects are we focused on?
Yeah, there's a lot of defensive line prospects, and that's not including edge guys. We're, just talking, 3 techs and noses. I mean, there's several options. I think the list starts with Jason Moore, like you said, top 100 prospect out of DeMatha in the DMV. Just saw him a couple weeks ago. Really, really like his frame. He's an athletic, long 3 tech that still can add some weight, but is very solidly built at about 6'6", 265 pounds. He's coming in for an official visit, also has official visits set with Notre Dame and Ohio State. I think right now Notre Dame has the edge going into the summer. He's never been to Michigan. I think Michigan can really move the needle on his official visit. Mike Elston actually originally recruited him at Notre Dame, so the connection there is really strong. I think Michigan's probably second or third right now, but again, I think his recruitment will really be determined with the summer visit. You mentioned John Walker out of Central Florida. He's a big nose guy, 310 pounds. I think that one's kind of turning into a Michigan-Ohio State battle. I'm curious to see where exactly he stands on the Ohio State board. I know he really, really likes Michigan. I was just in Florida literally Friday and was going to drive up to see him at his spring game, but that got rained out. So I haven't had a chance to see him live, but he fits that mold as a nose, and he is a top priority again coming in for his official next month. Some other guys to know, the top nose on the board is Jordan Hall out of Jacksonville West Side, another 300-pound kid that just plugs up the middle, an elite talent. Michigan working hard to get him in for an official visit. Another 300-pound mammoth that I saw in the Peach State was Caden McDonald out of North Gwinnett, which is a great program in the Atlanta area. Michigan working hard to get an official visit from him. Some other three techs to know. Sadiq Clemens out of Henderson County, Kentucky. Not a lot of buzz on him, only a three-star prospect, but I think Michigan actually leads for Clemens right now, so he's a name for Michigan fans to get really familiar with. A guy that Elston really likes is Kelsey Howard out of Las Vegas. Elston was just at his spring game a couple of weeks ago. Really athletic type of guy, wrestling background, track and field background, basketball background, just all-around great athlete at about 6'4", 255 pounds, so not as filled out as some of these other three tech guys, but Howard offers length and athleticism. He's coming in for an OV. Another guy that Elston went out to see that I really like is Xavier McLeod out of South Carolina. He's gotten so big. He's about 6'5", 300 pounds. He can be a nose. He can be a three tech. I think he's an elite talent. I think some sites have him really underrated. Others have him as a top 150 prospect. I'm really, really high on McLeod. I think he's a tremendous talent as well. You mentioned Jalen Thompson out of Cass Tech. I think with Elston coming in, he's a little lower on the board, so it doesn't seem like they're making the in-stater too much of a priority. But some of the guys I mentioned are definitely guys around the top of the board.
Well, sticking on the defensive side, I know we've been interested for a long time in Cormani McClain, and he's a 5-star kid from Lakeland, Florida. So how are we doing with them, and who are some of the other prospects that we're looking at back there?
Yeah, Cormani McClain's still the top guy on the corner board. I think it's safe to say that he's probably trending away right now. Florida is the overwhelming favorite. If he were to pick a school today, I do think it would be Florida. Steve Clinkscale's still trying. He was down there in the Sunshine State seeing him a couple of weeks ago. So Michigan's still involved, still in the mix, but going to be a really, really tough pool. So I'm not super excited about where Michigan stands there right now. Another elite talent that Michigan's recruiting at corner is Malik Muhammad out of South Oak Cliff down in Dallas. I really like Muhammad. I think he's a ball hawk. I think he's a guy that's the lead at the position. I think he's right behind Cormani McClain as a high-level guy. And the same thing goes for fellow Dallas area native Javion Taviano out of Arlington Martin. I think those two guys are very high on Michigan's board, but again, will be tough pools from the Lone Star State. So going down on the board a little bit and looking at maybe some more realistic targets on the corner board, a guy I love, had a chance to see at his track meet last week is Jair Hill here in Illinois. I love Hill. He's a bigger corner at about 6'2", 170 pounds. Just ran a 10.79 100 meter, I believe. So he's long, he's tall, he's fast. Had a chance to see him in game last season as well. He was super impressive playing wildcat quarterback, wide receiver, kick returner, corner, safety. Michigan originally offered him as a safety, but now has him on the corner board. I think right now it's more of a Michigan-Illinois battle, and I know that's kind of weird to hear, but Illinois not too far from him. His mom really is a big fan of the new coaching staff for the Illini. Michigan getting in Hill for an official visit next month. They're really going to have to impress the mom to win him over, but I think so far Clinkscale and Ron Bellamy have done a really good job of recruiting Hill. Another guy that's very high on the corner board is Chris Peel out of North Carolina at Providence Day School in Charlotte. Michigan has some staff connections there. Peel never does interviews. He's kind of a hidden ghost out in North Carolina, but I know Michigan feels optimistic about getting him in for an official visit, and they really, really like him. They also love Daniel Harris out of Miami Gulliver Prep, which is the same high school as top 100 wide receiver target Jaylen Brown. Harris, a tall corner at 6'2", 175 pounds. Looking to make an official visit to Michigan soon, has the Wolverines in his top group. Will be another tough pool from the state of Florida, but Clinkscale really, really likes him. He was out at his spring game on Thursday. I was there as well and was really impressed with Harris. So those are some of the guys that are high on Michigan's board as pure corners.
Well, as of right now, we do not have a safety commit, and I believe the last that I saw, we have 29 offers out there for safeties. Any that you know that may be leaning Michigan's way or that we're gaining ground with?
Yeah, so Michigan's approach with safety recruiting has been a little different with the staff shakeup. So they're looking to take 2 corners, 1 nickel, and 1 safety. So the top nickel target is actually Aaron Gates, who's a 4-star defensive back out of Sharpsburg, Georgia. He's currently committed to Florida. But he is scheduled to visit Michigan for an official visit next month. He was actually just on campus for the spring game in April. I really like where Michigan stands with Gates. I have a flip pick in. I think he's going to be the nickel take. Safety is a little more interesting since they're only looking at taking 1. The top guy on the board is actually Notre Dame commit Peyton Bowen, who's a top 50 prospect nationally. He's from Den Geyer, which is also in the Dallas area. One of the premier programs in the Dallas area, actually reached the state finals in the toughest classification in Texas. And Bowen's a star player for them. He's a great talent on the back end. I think it's really interesting that Michigan is slated to get him on campus for an official visit on June 17th, especially since Notre Dame is trying to implement, one of those stupid no-visit policies that I think, that's another story for another day. But I think those policies are dumb. But I think that Michigan getting him in, despite Notre Dame trying to put in those policies, is obviously some real positive movement. Clinkscale has been putting in a ton of work with Bowen, so he's definitely one to watch. Some other safeties that they're kind of in on, Makari Vickers out of Tallahassee just listed Michigan in his top schools list. Wolverine's trying to get him on campus for an official visit next month. Clinkscale, while he was making his tour around the Sunshine State, stopped by Venice to check in on Alabama commit Elliot Washington, who's wavering from the Crimson Tide. So he's definitely another one to watch that Clinkscale's interested in. There are a couple guys that are a little lower on the board that Michigan has a good chance with. TJ Metcalf out of Alabama visited earlier this offseason. And is a guy that is interested in returning for an official visit. I don't think one is scheduled just yet because he's kind of in that next tier. And the same goes for Robert Billings out of Milton in Alpharetta, Georgia. Billings is originally from Muskegon, so he has connections to the state of Michigan. He grew up a Michigan fan. He would love to take a Michigan official visit this summer. But again, a guy that's kind of in that next tier. So those are some of the safety targets. Another guy that came to mind is Dalton Brooks out of Shiner, Texas. He's high on the board. He's looking to make an official visit to Michigan this summer, kind of more in that long shot category.
Jim likes a lot of the athletes, or guys that fall under the athlete category, I should say. And you mentioned one of those names at the top of the show. It's Nichols Harbor. He's out of Archbishop Carroll in D.C. As you said, he's a 5-star. How are we doing with him? And are there some other guys that fall under the athlete category we're big on?
Yeah, definitely. Nicholas Harbor is an absolute freak show, man. I love Nick. I've had a chance to go out and meet with him twice out in Washington, D.C. Not only a tremendous player, but also a tremendous person. He's one of the best kids I've ever met on the recruiting trail. 4.0 GPA kid, aspirations to be an NFL player, an Olympic sprinter. I mean, he's 6'5", 235 pounds, but he runs a 10.28, which is absolutely insane. And then he's also a kid that wants to be in the medical field as well. So he is kind of the total package. He's a guy that can be an elite edge rusher, but he also has talked to the coaching staff about protecting his body since he does have those Olympic aspirations and maybe playing on the offensive side of the ball as a wide receiver or as a tight end. I think you take Harbor at whatever he wants to play. In my opinion, Nicholas Harbor is the number one overall prospect in the country. You can talk to me all day long about Arch Manning, but I will take Nicholas Harbor over anybody. I mean, it is absolutely rare to see a 6'5", 235-pounder run a 10.28, and then you turn on the film, and I mean, he's absolutely killing kids. So, I mean, he's not just an athlete playing football. He's a football player who also happens to be a supreme athlete and a supreme student as well. His mom works at a hospital. His dad works for NASA. I mean, just terrific background all around. As you know, as far as where Michigan stands, I think Michigan's in a great spot. I think Michigan leads right now. I think Michigan leads for his teammate on 300 edge rusher, Joseph McCoy. So I think that connection will help as well. Harbor wants to take his time right now. He's focused more on track. I believe he has nationals coming up in Oregon in June. So he's not really looking to make official visits this summer. He wants to make them in the fall. He told me the two schools that will for sure receive official visits are Michigan and LSU. I know home state Maryland is making him a top priority. Penn State, where his sister attended school, is another program he's very high on. Georgia starting to make a bit of a run there with him, so that's one to watch, obviously. I, again, really like where Michigan stands right now. I do expect him to make a fall official visit. I wouldn't be surprised if he makes it in at some point this summer on an unofficial visit. He's already been to campus. He was at a game in the fall. But he loves the coaching staff. He loves what the program can offer on and off the field. His mom has a ton of family in the Detroit metro area, so he's called Michigan a second home. And Michigan's giving him the flexibility to play whatever he wants. And they're really pitching him hard on the track program as well. So love what Michigan's done with Nicholas Harbor. Another kid that falls in the athlete category that's very, very high on the board is Jacoby Johnson out of Mustang, Oklahoma. And, you know, last time Michigan landed a kid out of Oklahoma, it worked out pretty well in Jackson Hill. So they're hoping Jacoby Johnson is that next guy. This guy is an absolute freak. He's about 6'3", 185 pounds. I mean, he can play wide receiver. He can play safety. He can play corner. Right now, so originally Ron Bellamy went out to see him, and then Clink Scale went out to see him, and then Jesse Minter went out to see him. So now I think that Michigan is leaning towards him playing on the defensive side of the ball, maybe being I talked about Michigan taking two corners, one nickel and one safety. I think they would take Jacoby Johnson either as that safety or as just an athlete, as an added player in the secondary. I mean, they would make room for Johnson and slot him in as just a pure athlete. But he's a guy that can play any position. The interesting thing about Johnson is he was originally a high-level basketball recruit, so he actually had several Division I offers as a basketball player. He recently decided that he wanted to focus in on football. So Michigan has made him a number one priority, and they've done a fantastic job of recruiting him. And he's scheduled to come in for an official visit on June 17th for Victor's weekend. But he's a guy that's kind of a flex that can play a little bit of everything. And I really like where Michigan stands. He's a high academic kid. He's willing to lead the state of Oklahoma. He's very, very high on both Michigan and Stanford. I think it's a winnable recruitment. But he's definitely one that would fall under the athlete category. And another kid that I was really impressed with that falls under that athlete category is Jackson Howard out of Minneapolis. So I actually flew to Minneapolis and back the same day this weekend and had a chance to meet with Howard. Is a really impressive build at about 6'4", 245 pounds. He was originally a 50-plus offer kid as a tight end. He's added some weight. He's really filled out his frame. And now schools are looking at him more as more of an edge guy. Both Grant Newsome and Mike Elston have been involved in this recruitment. Mike Elston was out in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago to see him. Howard is scheduled to come in for an official visit on June 17th as well. He has Michigan in his Final Four along with Miami, Minnesota, and LSU. I think Michigan has as good of a shot as any of those schools to land Howard. I think he's a guy that can definitely play tight end. Grant Newsome still loves him, but I think his biggest upside is on the defensive side of the ball as an edge. But those three are definitely high-level athletes that Michigan's in on. And last one I'll throw out there is Kenyon Sadiq. This is a kid that I really want to see. He's about 6'4", 220 pounds out of Idaho. Michigan obviously struck gold with Colston Loveland in Idaho last cycle. I always love seeing kids kind of in obscure states. So I'm excited to go and see Sadiq. Michigan recruiting him as more of a wide receiver right now. But, I mean, he's a kid that could play linebacker as well. Again, I'm really interested in seeing him live. Ron Bellamy made it a priority to see him during the first week of the evaluation period, and he's scheduled to come in for an official visit next month as well. I think Michigan is more than capable of landing an Idaho kid in back-to-back classes.
Final question before we let you get away then, EJ. When I talk to listeners, they say, hey, they look at the class as it is right now with the verbals that we have and say, we came off a Big Ten championship and a playoff appearance, and a lot of that fan base expected more commits or thought they would start rolling in more quickly this year. It hasn't happened. I mean, it's a good class. I think it's top 15 right now. But as you said, Michigan does their best work in the summer, and if they get just some of these kids, this is easily a top 10 class then, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, Michigan does its best in the summer. I was expecting Michigan to roll just like the entire fan base, but obviously there was a chaotic offseason. It's tough anytime you lose both coordinators. Mike McDonald obviously going off to the NFL, Josh Gaddis going off to Miami. And then you just had a ton of shuffling around with the coaching staff. Ron Bellamy going back to receivers, Jay Harbaugh going to safeties, Grant Newsome going to tight ends. You bring in Mike Elston, who's a new defensive line coach. So the coordinators are the same on the offensive side of the ball, or not the same, but obviously, you have Matt Weiss and Sharon Moore as co-offensive coordinators who are already on staff. The defensive side of the ball, you have a new coordinator in Jesse Minter who comes over from Vanderbilt. So just a lot of different moving parts along the staff. And that's not even to mention the Jim Harbaugh storylines with the NFL and him almost taking the Minnesota Vikings job. So it was just a whirlwind of an off season coming off a Big Ten championship. I think the momentum was lost. The window to capitalize on a special season was just completely shattered with Harbaugh and his NFL talks and the staff movement and all of that. So I think Michigan's just getting that back. But Michigan's always done a great job in the summer. They've always done a great job on official visits. I think commitments are going to roll here in June. I think they're going to land several guys before the end of summer. And I think they'll be in it with those elite guys heading into December. And I think you'll see a strong close just like last cycle. I mean, at this point last year, we weren't talking about Darius Clemens. He had eliminated Michigan. We weren't talking about Derek Moore. He was committed to Oklahoma. We weren't talking about Keon Saab. He was committed to Clemson. So you just never know what happens in recruiting. I think Michigan's more than capable of staying in elite recruitments and winning them late. And Michigan's also great at finding hidden gems late. Nobody knew who Mason Graham was at this point last year. Now he's one of the biggest freshman standouts of the spring. So I think Michigan's going to be just fine. They'll finish with a top 10 class just like they always do, so no need to panic.
Here with us on our show today has been recruiting writer EJ Holland from the Wolverine, recruiting analyst for the Wolverine. He does such a fantastic job, as you can tell by listening. And it is so important with the recruiting season, June, July, and August. As you said, Michigan will be doing their best work, or usually does their best work in the summer. There's going to be a lot to talk about, and we hope to get you back on the show in the coming weeks and months and talk more recruiting.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. Anybody that's listening, if you're not subscribed to the Wolverine, you can subscribe now, $1 for 1 year. So that's obviously cheaper than a cup of coffee. I don't think you can buy anything. I don't think I could buy you anything, Mike, for $1. So you can subscribe for $1 for 1 year. Just thought I'd plug that in, but I appreciate you for having me on the show.
On Quick Hits today, number 24 ranked Michigan softball sacrificed an early lead and could never recover, falling to number 18 ranked and host UCF 9-4 in the NCAA Regional Championship game on Sunday afternoon at the UCF softball complex. The Knights, 49-12, took advantage of walks, drawing 3 straight with the bases loaded in the first and adding a bases-loaded hit batter in the third to build an early 5-run lead. The Wolverines chipped away, however, getting 2 in the bottom of the third and another in the fifth to pull within 1. That was as close as Carol Hutchins' team would come to taking the lead. 4 different Michigan pitchers saw time in the circle, but it was graduate student Megan Bobian who took the loss. Michigan ended another outstanding season with a record of 38 wins against 18 losses, so once again, congratulations to Coach Carol Hutchins and her team. Number 5 seed baseball will kick off the Big Ten Conference Tournament on Thursday with an opening round contest against number 4 seeded Illinois. Michigan's game against Illinois was originally scheduled for Wednesday at 9 p.m. Central Time, but was rescheduled to Thursday due to forecasted weather in the area on Wednesday. Should the Wolverines defeat the Illini, they will advance to play the winner of Maryland, Indiana on Friday at 1 p.m. Central Time. However, if Michigan falls into the losers bracket, the Wolverines will face the loser of Maryland, Indiana on Thursday evening at 9 p.m. Central Time. That will do it for another show. We're on our summer schedule right now, so that means 2 shows a month until August, when we resume weekly programming in advance of football season. So our next scheduled program will drop on Wednesday, June 16th, and I hope you'll join us for that. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue.
Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!